Is Nintendo sitting on finished games? This might sound like a weird topic, but it's something that's been on my mind recently, and we've gotten more and more things in the past year that heavily suggest they do this, so I thought it'd be fun to talk about and just kind of hypothesize why Nintendo likes to seemingly finish a video game and then sit on it for months, even years at times, and just kind of go over the recent examples we have and just kind of discuss, because I really think it's such a weird thing that, and weird place Nintendo is in with the Switch, and just in general, because they have so many employees and development studios, and they pump out so many games that they're able to do this. They are able to feasibly create a video game and just not release it, or at the very least wait longer than they need to release it. You look at Microsoft, Sony, Ubisoft, EA, any other developer, and there's no shot. Maybe like a month or two, right? But never to the point that I'm talking about that Nintendo seemingly does. And it's just really weird. So first off, I'm going to go over like the obvious examples, stuff we knew was literally done before it was even announced. Recent examples of that include both Metroid games from Mercury's team, Metroid Samus Returns and Metroid Dread. Both of those games were revealed at their respective E3s, 2017 and 2021, and released a few months later. We know from interviews that those games were completely finished when they were announced, so that's weird. I believe in 2020 there was even rumors that Metroid Dread was done in 2020. Because people thought it was going to come out that year based on Mercury's team's hirings and all that. So that right there is just kind of weird. And I think those two are probably the most infamous examples that we've had in the recent Switch era of Nintendo that have released. They're in the past now, but there's a lot going on right now that is seemingly in a similar situation. And I just kind of have to ask why. I don't know if it's because Nintendo is trying to be very trepidatious with how they transition into the next console, or what. Maybe they're trying to save software for a drought that they maybe foresee happening if they can't get their other bigger titles out, because most of these are smaller projects, but it's still weird. So I have, I believe, 5 games here that are reportedly done or were done before they released, with a very recent example. That's what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing we'll talk about is Fire Emblem Engage. Fire Emblem Engage was heavily rumored to be done in 2021, and we now pretty much know that that's true because the game was certified through PEGI in September of 2021. I believe it was September. Don't fact check me on that. There are a few reasons this makes sense outside of job listings and people leaving Intelligent Systems and all that, because typically when a game finishes development, you know, employees will leave, move to other studios, that kind of thing. Especially within Nintendo, they like to do a lot of internal restructuring, though this is Intelligent Systems. But yeah, so Fire Emblem Engage finished in 2021. That also makes sense because it is very clearly an anniversary game. 2021 was the 30th anniversary of Fire Emblem. We even got that big special box that came with the first game as an NES ROM, localized for the first time. So I don't think it's a stretch to say at all that Fire Emblem Engage was probably supposed to come out in 2022. There's a couple weird things here. Maybe they didn't release it because Three Hopes wasn't ready, which would have been weird to release Engage before Three Hopes, because Three Hopes is, of course, a pretty integral piece of Three Houses. So releasing the next mainline Fire Emblem before a spinoff of the last game, maybe they were trying to just match it up with that. I think that's probably the main reason they did this. Or maybe it's just because they thought their lineup for 2023, or 2022, sorry, was strong enough to begin with, and in my opinion it was, where they had a pretty major release every month with a couple of exceptions in there. Regardless, it looks like they did sit on the game for about a year, and I'm sure in that time they weren't doing nothing. I'm sure they did some, you know, bug fixing or polishing, working on the DLC, whatever it is, because that game is getting DLC. I would imagine that DLC is probably done, to be honest. But regardless, the game is out now, and it seems they sat on it for a long time. Now, before we move on from Fire Emblem, and this might get its own video soon because I think it's really interesting, and it will depend on the next Direct. It was data mined in the files of the game that the code name for Fire Emblem Engage is Iron 19. Iron is just the code name they use for all Fire Emblem games. So if Engage is Fire Emblem or Iron 19, you would assume Three Houses was Iron 18 because that was the previous mainline Fire Emblem. It was Iron 17, which means there is an elusive game in there that just is obviously in development, was obviously meant to come out before Fire Emblem Engage, and just hasn't surfaced. Maybe it's having development issues, maybe they didn't really intend on it coming out before then, but either way, it was in development before Engage started. Now, before you say this, I know what you're thinking. Probably just Three Hopes? No, Fire Emblem Warriors does not have the same codename. Neither 2017 Fire Emblem Warriors or Three Hopes, the sequel or pseudo-sequel standalone spinoff of Three Houses. So they don't have the same codename. Now, there are reports that Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War is getting a remake. That's Fire Emblem 4. And they do count remakes as numbered codenames. Fire Emblem Echoes, I believe, is what, 16? So it's likely that, to be completely honest, it is likely a remake of some sort of Fire Emblem game. Maybe it's not necessarily going to be Genealogy, though, with how present Sigurd is in the story of Engage, I would assume that's probably what's going to happen. So that's another thing entirely, and I mean, you know, to be honest, we don't know much about it other than that it clearly exists. There's obviously an elusive 18th Fire Emblem game that isn't technically Engage in the code name. So that's really interesting, and I think it paints a pretty picture for what we can expect from maybe like a September Direct this year, where they announce another Fire Emblem game, and then people lose their minds on Twitter, because every year we've gotten a Fire Emblem game. I'm loving it. But moving on to Fire Emblem, we have two other very prominent kind of rumors. One of these is much more likely, I think, than the other, though I do trust the person that reported all this. So the first thing came, I believe, from Emily Rogers originally. Correct me in the comments. Emily Rogers, Nintendo famed leaker. I think she's retired from that now. But in June, I believe, of last year, she reported that Nintendo was pretty much sitting on a sequel to 1-2 Switch. Now, that might sound funny, 1-2 Switch, why would they make a sequel to that? It actually did really well. I think it sold 3 million copies, so it was a sales success for Nintendo. It probably didn't cost much to develop outside of the R&D for the Joy-Cons themselves, so why not go ahead and make a sequel, throw it on store shelves? Certainly won't sell as much as the original because it was a launch title, but why not? Now, she reported that in focus testing, the game was not well received, and that's why they're sitting on it. They're afraid of hurting the brand. Now, I don't know if she means they're afraid of hurting the Nintendo brand or the 1-2 Switch holy name, because that's some sacred thing, I guess. But either way, if her reporting is right here, and there might have been others, I think Jeff Grubb may have said something about it. If all that's true, that means they're just sitting on a sequel to 1-2 Switch. This one makes more sense to me, as evidently, based on the report, that the game wasn't well received. So maybe they just aren't going to release it. I find it hard to believe, even if it is not good, that they wouldn't release it, because I find it hard to believe that 1-2 Switch itself wasn't focus tested poorly, because that game is not very good. I personally have a little fun with it back when it came out, but it's not that good of a game. So if that game is done, if the sequel got greenlit to begin with, I would imagine it's probably still going to come out, and maybe that'll come out this year. Maybe we'll see it in the next Direct. Maybe it'll be a Twitter drop. Who knows? But that's another one that seems pretty likely. But the biggest unannounced project that Nintendo has seemingly finished, that is like actually finished development, that we have not heard about, that people have been talking about for years, and it is not just the simple, oh, it's rumors. We literally have job listings suggesting it, is Metroid Prime Remake. So this has all been going on for years now with Metroid Prime Trilogy back in 2018. Then in 2021, I believe, is when it happened. People kind of shifted to Metroid Prime Remake. That is because Retro finished a project in 2021. They straight up finished a project. What? There's no way it's Metroid Prime 4, so the logical thinking is that it's Metroid Prime 1 Remake. Maybe it's Trilogy, actually. It could be Trilogy. But either way, Prime 1 Remake, Metroid Prime Trilogy, whatever it is, they are sitting on it. Or whatever this retro game is. Why? Why are they? I guess the idea would be that they're trying to save it with more synergy with Metroid Prime 4, which I assume is probably maybe late this year, early next. So they want to release it a little bit closer to that, have some more synergy with sales there, marketing, all that stuff. I assume when we see this game, we'll see it with Prime 4. Just really weird, especially because Metroid Dread was such a huge sales success. So you would think have that come out 2021, 2022, if this game was actually done, which it was based on job listings, have Metroid Prime Remake, Prime Trilogy, whatever you want to call it, come out in 2022, and then 2023, early 2024, you'd have Prime 4. So that's just really weird. I don't really get that one myself personally, but who knows? And then the final one I want to talk about today is one that we do know is done, is Advance Wars. Now this was delayed multiple times for an obvious reason, the war in Ukraine, but the game is done. I don't think anybody's going to be offended, Nintendo, if you release it at this point. Originally, this game was supposed to come out in December of 2021. It is 2023 now. The game got pushed to April 2022, and then, because of the war in Ukraine, it got delayed all the way to who knows. But it got delayed so close to its April release date that it certainly had to be done. I mean, I'm talking like 3 or 4 weeks. It was right before it was supposed to come out. Some people even got to play the game if they preloaded it. That's how close it was to release. I would even argue, and this is just me speculating, but I would even argue the game was probably done in 2021, but they decided to delay it so that their lineup in 2022 would be a little bit more varied. And this could even go back to the Fire Emblem speculation. I do wonder if maybe that's why they switched around some release dates like Fire Emblem Engage and the Fire Emblem remake that it's almost certainly in development. Maybe that's what happened. Because I really do think this was probably done in 2021, of course being developed by WayForward and supervised by Intelligent Systems. But 2021, also, weird that they even announced this, but the same day that Advance Wars came out, Big Brain Academy Brain vs. Brain came out. Nintendo doesn't really do the 2 games on one day anymore, so maybe that's why they delayed it, and then obviously the war in Ukraine happened. Either way, the game is done, and they're just sitting on it. Now, maybe they just don't feel it's right to release it still, because the war in Ukraine is obviously still going on, but like I said, I don't think anybody's going to be offended if that drops now. Seems weird to just hold on to it. I am a little worried about it. It seems like one of those things Nintendo might just be like, okay, tax write-off, goodbye Advance Wars. So hopefully we see that game soon, because it's approaching 1 year since it was last supposed to come out, which is crazy for a video game that is finished. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about all this. I think it's really interesting that Nintendo is really the only developer that just sits on video games, full AAA or AA, if you want to call them that, video games, and doesn't release them. They don't do it with their biggest titles. The biggest here is Fire Emblem for sure. But, you know, Mario, Zelda, they're not really doing it with those games. And maybe remakes of those games, like Skyward Sword HD, I imagine, was probably finished a good few months before it released. That kind of thing. But you just don't see this. You don't see this from Western developers at all. I would even argue you don't really see it from any other Japanese developers. Nintendo is in such a weird, unique spot with the Switch where they need to release games at a certain rhythm to hit these marketing beats, because while third-party software on Switch does sell well, it's very reliant on their own first-party software. A great example, I would imagine, is this Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. This game's probably been done for like a year, man. There's no way they just were like, okay, after Forgotten Land came out, they just worked on this. I'm sure this game was just done, basically, because it probably didn't take them very long to do. So, with that said, I would love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What do you think of the whole Nintendo sitting on finished games debates that people bring up now and then? It certainly seems more prominent now than ever, especially as we are starting to begin maybe thinking about transitioning to the next generation of hardware, where maybe developers are going to start making games for that next hardware and sitting on it. It's just very interesting to me, and it's just kind of like a look into how Nintendo operates and how they do their marketing and all the release cycles and all that. The Fire Emblem stuff is probably the most interesting, though, because that's over a year for like one of their biggest franchises. That's insane. So yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Of course, subscribe here for more Nintendo topics and discussions and news and reviews and all that fun stuff. This has been Botox Media signing off. I don't like that. I don't like saying that outro. Bye-bye.